Welcome to Let's Talk Hope, a podcast series aiming to reduce the stigma around suicide. In this series, we speak to a range of people who've been affected by or with lived experience of suicide. I'm your host, Gemma, and in each episode, I'm joined by Professor Pooja Saini, lead of the Suicide and Self-Harm Research Group at Liverpool John Moores University.
I wanted to do this series to showcase the voices of people who have been brave enough to speak about their experiences and who are constantly inspiring hope in other people who may find themselves in a similar situation. I'm in a unique position as an academic expert in suicide prevention who has had the opportunity to speak with people with personal experiences of suicide and those involved in setting up suicide-specific community-based services. My role has been to ensure that these services are designed to work well for the people who need them and that they embed evaluation and research to show the impact of their work.
In this series, you're going to hear from a really diverse range of people who really illustrate that anyone can be touched by suicide, regardless of age, background, or gender. These are important and impactful stories that we hope will open up conversations about suicide. And if you know someone who you feel would benefit from listening to this series, please pass it on. This episode is called Suicide Survivors Stories of Strength, and we had a conversation with Jake, Damian and Lindsay, and they shared their experiences of either attempting or seriously considering suicide. Now, this was a really honest conversation we had with them about how bad things can really get and then how they came out of the other side.
I came across all three of their stories and their lived experience and how that's impacted and shaped some of the services that have been designed, and some of the research that we're conducting has been really important.
Okay, let's hear their stories. So we're here with Jake Mills, Damian Faulkner and Lindsay Gilmartin, and I thought it would be nice to start by just finding out a little bit about each of you. So Damian, I'll start with you. Would you just mind sharing your story and how that's led you to where you are now?
Yeah. So I've suffered with depression since I was roughly about 14, I'd say. It came about in a really deep thought process I had when I was a kid, and it was almost in one night. I was part of a rough family, I'd like to say. I wouldn't really call them rough, but we lived in rough areas, do you know what I mean? And that sort of exposed me to bits I shouldn't have seen. Things like violence. I was a part of violent crowds, violent gangs. I suffered really severe anxiety, didn't know how to express myself in different ways. That all came about, so I sort of bottled it up for years and years and years. And then I went through a pretty severe breakup last year, and I wouldn't really say that was the cause, but it sort of was the straw that broke the camel's back, and it led me down this really dark pit into severe depression, where I was not only did I notice it, how bad my thought process was, how bad my mind was getting, but all my friends noticed it, my family noticed it, and then all I was trying to do was shut them off to get them away from me. I'd made pretty serious plans, and then out of nowhere, one of my mates just listen, before anything, just try this, and then give me a link to James's place, where I filled out a pretty short survey, to be honest, in about 15 minutes on the door in work, and 20 minutes later, I got a phone call saying, listen, do you want to come in? This is pretty severe.
Oh, wow. So it was that quick?
It was that quick, yeah.
And for those who don't know, could you just explain what James's place is?
Yeah. So it's a charity for men going through suicidal crisis, severe suicidal crisis. And it was one of the best experiences I could have got myself into. Realistically, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you if it weren't for that place. I can confirm that.
Wow, that's incredible. And Lindsay, would you mind sharing your story and kind of how that's brought you to this place?
Yeah, back in 2022, I began with severe anxiety and depression completely out of the blue. It wasn't something I suffered from in my past. It spiraled rapidly in a matter of weeks, where I found myself extremely suicidal and had to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act. I ended up in an inpatient facility treated with electroconvulsive therapy and a myriad of antidepressants. And unfortunately, on weekend leave, I did try to take my own life, which didn't go according to plan. I sustained fractured spine, pelvis, and several other fractures. And in a matter of weeks, it all came down to more investigation, and thankfully my husband's a GP, and it turned out that I was actually perimenopausal, and my suicidal ideations and intrusive thoughts was due to perimenopause. And thankfully, I'm on HRT, and within a month of being on HRT, all my symptoms subsided.
I would like to just say at this point, we are doing a separate episode just about the menopause. So if you're listening and this is resonating with you, then that might be a nice other episode for you to go and listen to. Thank you, Lindsay. And Jake, hello, thanks for being here. Could you share your story, please?
Yeah, I'd say, I was going to say my story started 12 years ago, but in hindsight, it probably started a long time before that. But around 12 years ago, I started to really struggle with my mental health. But I knew nothing about mental health, so I didn't know what that was, what that meant. I didn't know anything about signs or symptoms or feelings. So I very much felt like I was feeling this real suffocation, and the easiest way to describe it is almost like I was treading water every single day, sometimes going under, sometimes staying above, but every single day felt like this absolute internal and external battle. I didn't know that it was a thing that I could get help with. I thought it was a me thing, so I just, very similarly shut myself off. Other people might have noticed things, but I didn't want them to ask me because I didn't know that it was anything that I could actually explain or ask for help for or try to talk to anybody about. So I actually felt this real burden the more that people asked me. And long story short, eventually that did lead to me attempting to take my own life 11 years ago, just over. And yeah, I never ever thought that I would be at that stage. I didn't think that I'd be somebody who would attempt to take their own life, but I genuinely felt like I had no other options. And in some ways, that's also where the story begins a lot for me as well, because as a result of speaking publicly about what I went through, I realised just how many people were going through almost the exact same thing at almost the exact same time, all feeling like they were the only ones to do it. And so I then decided to try to take my experience to turn that into a positive and created a national mental health charity called Chasing the Stigma. And then as a result of doing that, creating a directory of mental health support called the Hub of Hope, which is now the biggest directory of mental health services in the country. But what we're trying to do is really use lived experience to speak to people like me and possibly like others on this as well, who never knew the mental health conversation actually included them. So what we're trying to do is really humanise and normalise the conversation using our own lived experience to try to reach people who maybe would never ever be reached in that conversation.
It's incredible.
And I think, Jake, you brought me really good on to the next point, is within research and academia, we're always trying to include people with lived experience so that any of the research we're doing, any new interventions, services we're creating actually meet the needs of those people who will be using them. And actually with Jake, I came across Jake when he was doing a comedy show, which was for Mental Health Week at a university. And we got chatting, and I actually mentioned to Jake that I was involved in setting up a service, James's Place, and would he like to kind of come along to the meetings and give some of his thoughts about how a service like this should look for someone who might find themselves in a crisis. So I don't know, Jake, if you want to add a bit more about your involvement in that process.
Yeah, so what, I'm smiling to myself there because I remember the early meetings that we had as a group to try to discuss, what would you like it to look like? What would you, what when you walk in, what would you see? And some people were like, I'd like this colour on walls. Some people were like, it'd be good to have like Sky Sports on, and we were like, that's a pub. You want to go to a pub? What do you want in this type of centre? But it was really good for us to try to actually get the opinion of people who are going to be using these sites. And I think you can see that now when you do go to James's Place, that it's a non-clinical environment that people feel welcomed in, that people feel safe in. And yeah, that's testament to the work that went into all of that, just to get that lived experience point of view to say, what would you want to be in? And that's such an important question, a very simple question, but one that we're not really usually asked too many when it comes to the statutory services and services like that. So the benefit of somewhere like James's Place is that you were able to actually ask those questions and then influence the actual design.
And I guess environment's a big thing, isn't it? You want people to feel safe and welcomed, not kind of like beige walls and uncomfortable chairs all lined up. It does make a difference, doesn't it?
Definitely. And I think this brings me on quite well to, one of the menopause clinics that I know Lindsay's had a lot of contact with as well. And again, I felt like the environment there and the people, it was very holistic, the kind of service they were providing. And again, very non-clinical, even though in both of the places we mentioned, they are offering clinical interventions, but it doesn't feel like a hospital. And I don't know, Lindsay, if you'd like to share a bit more about your experience.
Yeah, with mine, I was in such a dark place and it became very medicalised very quickly. But the stigma, I was very honest about how I was feeling, that these thoughts, and I really did want to end my life. And I felt that I was not really treated as a human. There was a lot of lacking of understanding. I had professionals saying, well, why would you do that? You've got children. And almost the guilt that was put on me while I was trying to be as open as I could be in a really, really difficult situation. And throughout it all, I ended up in a very set medical strategy. Like you say, very stark walls. Nobody really sat down to talk to me at any point as to what my suicidal feelings were, what they involved, to possibly explore it. I was made to feel such shame. And thankfully, since my recovery, through the Newson Health Clinic, I've been part of a study, and yourself sort of looking into links between menopause and suicide. And there's so many women out there suffering in silence without any real understanding or a place to necessarily go to feel that they can be open.
Yep, and it's been really great. Lindsay's been involved in our public advisory group. So we try and develop these groups with all of our research projects where we can feed in and out how we're designing a project, some of the questionnaires we might be using or interview questions, and they help us to ensure that we're asking appropriate questions and we're using the right wording. And also we feedback some of the results that we're finding as well, and they'll help us process, how we should be writing that up too. So I think the group that you're involved with, Lindsay, has been one of the most powerful groups I've been in. It's been quite heart-wrenching to listen to some of the stories that have come through and the struggles, but I also think it's been really empowering to hear how people have got through those struggles and where they've sought support from. And I think, and all three of you today, I think, have really emphasised that.
I think it's interesting, Lindsay, just to go back to what you said before, it kind of shows how much more awareness is needed, bearing in mind that you said that your husband's a GP. On paper, you should have been ideally placed for somebody to realise what was happening. And I mean, no shade on your husband there, but,
yeah, No, I completely agree with that. This was in 2022, so menopause, it was starting to come out. I think Davina's first documentary had just been released, and it wasn't a conversation that had seemed to be in the media as it maybe is now. For myself, I was just turned 45, so there was no education given to me that actually I was in a really prevalent age bracket that something like this could happen. But because I didn't have any physical multivasal symptoms that you would associate with the perimenopause, it really did look like a mental health disorder, and that's why they treated me. But had I known that, had I had that education, had there been places where this is openly spoken about, that women's mental health, this can happen as on account of our hormones, that could have taken it a whole different route.
Damian, am I right in thinking that you now volunteer at James's place?
I do, yeah. I'll think I'll gladly volunteer for anything. Realistically, mostly what I do is I speak to people, and I've done a podcast previously speaking about my own journey through obviously my life and then what it was like going to James's place. But yeah, I do volunteer a bit. Not as much as I'd like to though. Obviously, I work full time too.
One thing, Damian, you shared with me, if you don't mind me saying before, is about how this has opened up conversations for you back at work.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And I think when we're talking about raising awareness, it'd be really great if you could share some of that.
So I work with very difficult people, not to say exactly what I do. I work for the government, and along those lines you come across people who are suicidal, and they come from very similar areas I come from. They've done things in life that you don't really, particularly proud of, and my experiences with suicidal depression and depression or any form of mental health is a way in for them to talk to people. Like, so a lot of these people never had anyone be nice to them, and then they've never had anyone have a similar experience to them. They think they're very like isolated, and they don't know about mental health. They don't know what like things they can say or like ways to even prevent other than like through violence or anger or just acts of like instinct. And there's been points in my life where I know for a fact I've saved people, like through doing my job and like being able to communicate with them on a level and basically like speak from their perspective, where it's like, listen, like, you're not the only one. I can speak to them about ways that like all the thought process I had prior to my sort of, I wouldn't say downfall, but like, you know, before like my bad state, and help them bring them up, or like help them like be an actual physical example of a light at the end of the tunnel, and then provide just sort of motivational like things, exercises, things to do because the situation they're in is not particularly like free. Do you know what I mean? So there's the kind of stuff. But yeah, I've helped a lot of people throughout the time there, and it's something that I'm quite passionate over. It's just like helping people like who are struggling. Just
one element with your work, Jake, that you're doing now, and you've obviously gone on to create the Hub of Hope, and just some of the side of it of the data collection. You know, I'm obviously a data person. I love data, but just how important that is with your work and what you've been showing, which I think has been unbelievable.
Do you know what? However many years ago, I sat in my bedroom in my mum's house, and I said, I'm just going to put a list of services together that I can find. What I didn't think at any point there is, one, the size of that was going to grow, and two, anything about data. Like, that was so far from my mind, anything that we'd be able to do. But what we have been able to do by creating what is the biggest directory of services for mental health support in the country. It's got over 14,500 services listed within it. So they are statutory services, NHS support, but also voluntary sector organisations, private, etc. Having a list of 14,500 services of mental health support across this country has never, ever been done before. And that seems ridiculous, because you would think that somebody somewhere would know the help and support that's available, but they don't. So what we've done naturally is created the biggest asset mapping exercise in the country. But by having people then using the Hub of Hope, searching the Hub of Hope for support near them, you know, we have over 300,000 users a year, over 1 million searches a year. We're able to collect certain data and analytics, so it's completely anonymized as a tool. So we don't know any personal data, but we can see trends. We can see what people are looking for in different parts of the country. We can see nationally, we can see age brackets, we can see what people are looking for on certain times of day or days of the week or certain months of the year. We can see whether people are looking for certain types of support following certain events or even television programs that have happened or anything like this. And what we're able to actually tell is these trends in different areas of the need of people. And then we can then look at, is the provision actually there? So for example, we could see, this is just an example, but we might be able to see that men between the ages of 34 and 45 are looking for crisis support on a Sunday evening at 7 o'clock. Is the support there? And if it's not, then can we then influence policy? Can we influence commissioning for that area? Can we actually maybe try to speak to different commissioners to try to get them to open a service in that area that can then meet that demand? But it's one of those things, without that data, if there's nobody there to pick up a phone, nobody else has that data. So what we've turned into, which went from this little Excel spreadsheet in my bedroom in my mum's house, is now a really, really powerful collection of data and analytics and insights that can influence such crucial local and national policy.
And all of the places and websites and everything that we've talked about in this episode will be available in the show notes. So if you are looking for anything, you can go there. And I think I'd just like to say thank you to the three of you for your honesty in this episode. You mentioned, Damian, that you know that you've helped people because they've told you. But I think listening to podcasts like this will help people that you'll never know about. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Let's Talk Hope, a podcast series aiming to end the stigma around suicide. Brought to you by Professor Pooja Saini, head of the Suicide and Self-Harm Research Group at Liverpool John Moores University. If you or someone you know has been affected by any of the issues discussed in this episode, please refer to the help and resources listed in the show notes for details of organisations that can provide support. This podcast was produced by Inabella Media and hosted by me, Gemma Cutting. Thanks for listening.